Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Welcome to our ritual night talk for December 28th. I'm Scott Stenwick, your host for these ritual night events, presented under the auspices of Leaping Laughter OTO in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Tonight I am going to be talking about another of the basic ceremonial rituals, the lesser ritual of the hexagram. I've included a couple of articles in the description. One, my general thoughts on the lesser ritual, the hexagram, and another one on the Goetic Circle and the operant field, which are things I will be talking about a little bit later in the video. And primarily I'm including that article just because it's a simple example of something that supports one of my ideas about how to work with this ritual. I have also included the donation link. No donation is too small. All donations go to support the operations of Leaping Laughter OTO in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So the lesser ritual, the hexagram, is a ritual that in a sense corresponds to the lesser ritual of the pentagram. As the pentagram is the symbol of the microcosm, that is the interior world of our psyche, also to some degree in our aura, our sphere of sensation. The hexagram is a symbol of the macrocosm, and that is the exterior world, pretty much everything outside of you that is beyond your sphere of sensation, which is of course reflected in your sphere of sensation when you perceive the world, process sensory information, and so forth. As with the lesser ritual, the pentagram, it's important to reiterate here again, lesser does not mean unimportant, it doesn't mean not as good, and it's actually pretty bad nomenclature for both of these rituals, both the lesser pentagram and the lesser hexagram. Both of these rituals are foundational rituals or general rituals. What you do with them is you use them to create your working space for doing specific magical operations. In effect, using them, it's like creating a kind of imaginary circle that creates a space in which magic will work in a certain way. Now, in the original Golden Dawn schema, initiates who were part of the outer order degrees, the 4 elemental grades, really only learned the lesser ritual, the pentagram. They weren't taught the lesser ritual, the hexagram, until they were inducted into the inner order. And then they were taught the lesser hexagram and various, the greater rituals for specific magical operations. But, students who were working their way through the initial grades pretty much did no magic besides the lesser ritual, the pentagram. And there are subgroups that behave kind of like that today where, you've got to do the lesser ritual, the pentagram for like a long period of time before you learn the hexagram and stuff like that. And I haven't found that to be the case. That's not what I teach my students. I pretty much teach my students to learn these rituals, right away and incorporate them into your daily practice as soon as you can. And so you're going to start off learning the lesser ritual, the pentagram, which was 2 weeks ago. You can add to that the middle pillar, which works fine with just the lesser ritual, the pentagram. Talked about that last week. And then to that you add the lesser ritual, the hexagram, which I'm going to talk about this week. So there are a couple of key differences in the way that the lesser ritual, the pentagram, and the lesser ritual, the hexagram work. While the pentagrams in the lesser pentagram are not really elemental, there are elemental attributions to the archangels who are attributed to the microcosmic or wind's elemental directions. So that's the element system that you see in esotericism all the time, where you've got air in the east, fire in the south, water in the west, earth in the north. And it's based on the feeling of the quality of winds, like the wind from the east are warm and moist, the winds from the south are warm and dry, west are cold and moist, and earth is cold and dry, which is about the situation that you would be in if you were doing these spells in Europe or, where I live in North America. I live in Minnesota, right in the middle of the North American continent. So basically, the winds here kind of work the same as they do in Europe. And what this is the microcosmic arrangement of the elements. It's based on how you perceive the winds coming to you from the perspective you are at. There's some people have talked about the idea of possibly flipping this around if you're in the southern hemisphere, seeing as warm comes from the north in the southern hemisphere. I have not done magic in the southern hemisphere. I can't really comment on that. So I would leave that to someone else to comment on, more from personal experience than what I have. In the lesser ritual, the hexagram, though, the elemental arrangement corresponds to the zodiac. So what you have is you have fire in the east corresponding to Aries, earth in the south corresponding to Taurus, water in the north corresponding to Cancer, and then finally air in the west corresponding to Libra. Now, one of the points that I want to make about this is that these elemental arrangements are important. And there is a book, Living Thelema by David Shoemaker, otherwise a pretty good book, and I know David and I like David, where he argues that, well, if you're going to use the lesser ritual, the pentagram, the lesser ritual, the hexagram together, you should synchronize their elements. So, the elements are all in like one direction based on how you're working. So, and his suggestion there is to switch around the lesser hexagram. So again, you have, air in the east, fire in the south, water in the west, earth in the north. And I do not believe that you should do this. First of all, there's no indication in the instructions for the ritual that this should be done. That's point number one. Point number two is that the lesser pentagram corresponds to the microcosm and the lesser hexagram corresponds to the macrocosm. And as a result, it should be reasonable that with the lesser hexagram, you'd have the zodiacal or macrocosmic, that is based on the position of the stars, order of the elements, whereas in the lesser pentagram, you have the winds order, which is more properly macrocosmic. And what this does is this creates a kind of dynamic tension between the two elemental systems, one for the macrocosm and one for the microcosm. And that tension, I believe, is important in terms of getting the macrocosm and microcosm to interlock the way we want it to. And that is essentially the point of these rituals. I talk about this idea of fields, like the operant field, which is my term for the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, followed by the lesser invoking ritual, the hexagram. And the function of that is, well, you are banishing microcosmically, so you're clearing, purifying your sphere of sensation. And then into that space, you're calling the macrocosmic forces of nature. And the field is this kind of sphere that is delineated by your imaginary circle, created by these two rituals. And within that sphere, what I have found, both, working it out logically and experimentally, is that within that type of a field where you have called in the macrocosm and you have cleared and purified the microcosm, as part of the same foundational operation, opening your ritual, you get a space where thought, that is, ideas native to your sphere of sensation, can more easily translate into probability shifts in the exterior world. And this is kind of an idiosyncratic way of teaching this ritual. I've talked about it quite a bit on my blog, talked about it quite a bit on social media, where this idea of taking the banishing form of the lesser pentagram and combining it with the invoking form of the lesser hexagram. Now, you see some of this in Crowley's work, too, where you look at the structure of like the star ruby, which is explicitly designed as a banishing, the star sapphire, which is explicitly designed as an invocation, at least in my opinion and according to my interpretation of that. And so doing the same with the lesser ritual, the pentagram, the lesser ritual, the hexagram, seems to be a helpful thing. Now, if you learn these rituals in some other traditions, what you're going to, you do the banishing pentagram, then the banishing hexagram. And you do that to both open and close your operations. And you can even look at some of like Crowley's earlier operations, and his diagram, he does it like that too. So it sounds like that was what the Golden Dawn was teaching. Other groups have picked that up. But I found that it doesn't really work as well. At least it doesn't work as well for me. And because of that, what I want to say is, I don't talk about this in a dogmatic way. I don't necessarily think if you're doing something and it's working for you that it's wrong. But I invite you to try it my way and see if it makes a difference. A lot of people have found that it seems to make a difference. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you will. As always, with these videos, with dealing with anybody on the internet, right? Go with your own direct experience. If you try the lesser banishing pentagram, the lesser invoking hexagram, and stuff just doesn't work for you, well, go ahead and go back to doing it the way you were doing it. Obviously, you had it right the first time. And that's the way it is because, as I mentioned, we don't have a general theory of magic. Magic works differently for different individuals. And it can be hard to tease out, what is a technical tweak and what is an individual difference. So, but I'm going to go ahead and teach it the way that I teach it. And that is, I teach that you follow the lesser invoking ritual, the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram with the lesser invoking ritual of the hexagram. Okay? And unless you're using it for some very other specialized purposes. You can do the banishing if you really want to clear a space. That will actually clear a space. Macrocosmic banishing, microcosmic banishing. If you do the lesser invoking ritual of the pentagram, lesser banishing ritual of the hexagram, that can basically kind of focus completely on your psyche. It can cut off like external influences and stuff. And when I worked that out, I thought that was going to be more useful than it turned out to be on paper, but it turns out I don't really use that very much. If you're working microcosmically, you can just go ahead and just open with the lesser ritual of the pentagram, like do a lesser invoking pentagram or something like that. And I mean, that's going to give you much the same effect, unless, I don't know, you've got a whole lot of macrocosmic influences coming at you or something. I have to say, I haven't found a really good application for that, though there probably is one. So, in the context of your daily practice, once you're doing the operant field, the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, lesser invoking ritual, the hexagram, you can go ahead and go to one practice session per day, because you have an invoking and you have a banishing element to your practice. What I was talking about for people who only know the lesser ritual, the pentagram, doing the invoking form in the morning, doing the banishing form at night is a good way to get some invocation and banishing into your practice. And you really need both, because you're not going to progress spiritually just by banishing. It's not about, you just remove the blocks and then you're in light. It does not work that way at all. Spiritual realization is something that you have to build up and you have to work toward. And you have to do that by using both banishing and invocation. So you need to cleanse and purify, and then you need to empower and energize. And those two things are what's going to move you, toward greater realization. I hesitate to say higher, because I don't like to see it kind of on a ladder like that, but more expanded consciousness. It's like what we generally think of as a person who is, quote unquote, enlightened, however you define that, is a thing that you build up and you move towards by consistent practice. And I think most systems in the world agree with that statement. So, how to do the lesser ritual, the hexagram. This version that I'm giving is the version from Liber O, which is, again, Aleister Crowley's publication that also includes this version of the lesser ritual, the pentagram. I'm going to do it a little bit differently than I would normally do it, because I'm facing the camera. Behind me is east. And so there's a point where you open and close with the signs of LVX. And I'm going to go ahead and do those signs facing the camera. And then I'm going to go around and trace the hexagrams. And then I'm going to come back and repeat them. So in this ritual, unlike the lesser ritual, the pentagram, the same word of power, ararita, is used for all four directions. But the hexagram you trace is different. So your elemental hex, so for example, fire, okay, is traced like a triangle and another triangle. Kind of looks like a flame, okay? The earth hexagram is more like the standard Star of David hexagram. You have the air hexagram is a triangle point up, and then below it a triangle point down. And finally, the water hexagram is triangle point up, and then triangle point down. And this is the water is the only one where you do the lower one first. So you do the lower one first, and then the upper one. It's like you always do the upright triangle first, but the upright triangle is the top one in every other shape. And you could think of the water hexagram as kind of looking like a cup. The air hexagram sort of looking like a diamond, sort of like a dagger. The earth hexagram definitely looks like a pentacle. And some people have compared the fire hexagram to a wand. I think it looks more like a flame than a wand. As far as colors go, generally speaking, when using these kinds of figures, there's a couple of things that you can do. First of all, you could trace them in their elemental colors. And so that would be red in the east, green in the south, yellow in the west, and blue in the north. Okay? And so that corresponds to those zodiac directions. So we're starting with Aries, We got Cancer. We got Cancer over here for water. So we got fire, water. Then around to the west, that's air, Libra, and then to the south. And then into the south is Capricorn, which is earth. So these are the 4 cardinal signs. Now, so in this case, okay, you've got a different hexagram, but you've got the same god name. So whereas in the pentagram, you have the same pentagram and different god name. And I'm not sure exactly how significant that is, but it's kind of a neat symmetry between the 2 rituals. So the ritual looks like this. And I'm going to make one other caveat of one other idiosyncrasy I do when doing these rituals. So when you get the signs of LVX, I guess this is the sign of Osiris slain. Okay, it's like a cross. And by the way, this is not the sign of Osiris slain. This is they said that in the movie The Devil Rides Out, Christopher Lee does the sign of Osiris slain like this. That's Osiris risen. Anyway, so Osiris slain is like this. And one of the things that I do when I do, some people say they do the sign of Osiris slain, the sign of the morning of Isis, the sign of Apophis and Typhon. I don't like to do it that way. I like to give the sign and say the name. So Osiris slain, the morning of Isis, Apophis and Typhon, Osiris risen, like that. And so that is a difference. You'll hear a lot of people where they say the sign of in front of the name of the sign. I don't personally do that. That's a personal idiosyncrasy. You do not need to do it that way. I just think it feels more dynamic to do it that way. So you're going to start out, and if you have a wand, use a wand. Otherwise, you can do this fig gesture like this. The thumb between your forefinger and middle finger. And hold it like this. And then you're going to do the keyword analysis, which is this first part, and then the signs of LVX, which is the sign part that I just mentioned. INRI, Yod Nun Resh Yod, Virgo, Isis, Mighty Mother, Scorpio, Apophis, Destroyer, Sol, Osiris, Slain and Risen, Isis, Apophis, Osiris, Osiris slain, the morning of Isis, Apophis and Typhon, Osiris risen, LVX, the light of the cross. And I'm going to turn around and start in the east. I would actually do this facing east, but I'm doing this to show it for the camera. Again, you trace the hexagrams with your wand, or you can use this gesture. Ararita, 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 Ararita. I'm going to go ahead and turn for this again, which I repeat. And I would do this normally, still facing east after I complete the circle. INRI, Yod Nun Resh Yod, Virgo, Isis, Mighty Mother, Scorpio, Apophis, Destroyer, Sol, Osiris, Slain and Risen, Isis, Apophis, Osiris, Osiris slain, the morning of Isis, Apophis and Typhon, Osiris risen, LVX, the light of the cross. And basically that is the ritual right there. Now you do the invoking form. In the invoking form, you trace the triangles clockwise. The banishing form, you trace the triangles counterclockwise. So, like, for example, for fire, or I'm going to, maybe this gets reversed in the camera, but I go, to my right, to the point, and then down again to my right, to the point. And visualizing that in the elemental colors, you'd visualize that one in red. So the keyword analysis is actually kind of the longer, more complex part of it. And there's a fair amount of symbolism in there. I had a friend go through it who's really studied it, there's like all these different layers of things. But basically, what this is the myth of Osiris as the dying and reborn god. And it's condensed down into the simple utterance that is called the signs of LVX, or looks light. Okay? And so the Golden Dawn system was very based on the Osiris myth. And so the Osiris myth is essentially, so Osiris is killed by his brother Set, Isis mourns. You have Apophis and Typhon. Osiris's body is basically scattered all over the place. Some people talk about this. Apophis and Typhon is not actually set, although sometimes it gets used that way. Apophis is actually more like Apophis and Typhon is more like the chaos of the deep kind of idea. And after Set murdered Osiris, he scattered Osiris's body parts all over Egypt. And so this is kind of like a chaos sort of thing. And Isis had to go around and put them all back together and then resurrect Osiris so that she could become pregnant with the child Horus, with Osiris, her husband. And so the sign of Apophis and Typhon, and then the sign of Osiris risen. And so what you've got is, this is a cross, this is kind of like an L, and there's two versions of this, by the way. This is Crowley's version, with the arm up, arm down, and you actually tilt the foot a little bit and turn sideways. The Golden Dawn version of it is actually more like this. It's actually just more like a big L, at least according to what you see in Rigardi. Not positive if between original Golden Dawn and Rigardi Golden Dawn is a question, but there is also a version of it that's based just more like an L. The V, Apophis and Typhon, is pretty much like a V. Just hold your arms up like this. And then Osiris risen is the X, and that's like an Egyptian mummy, basically. Their mummies were placed in this position so that they would rise in the afterlife, and so forth. And so you reiterate the myth with the keyword analysis, and then you have Isis, Apophis, Osiris, Iao. Iao is a Gnostic form of the Tetragrammaton. So that alludes back to kind of an esoteric Christian interpretation of this otherwise Egyptian myth, as does INRI at the beginning, which is, it's an alchemical formula, but it's also associated with Jesus and early Christianity. And so then, in giving the signs, you are placing your body in a series of postures that essentially reiterates the entire myth. So, Osiris slain, morning of Isis, Apophis and Typhon, Osiris risen. And then finally you vibrate LVX Lux. You should be vibrating Lux right when you're making the cross like this. Then you say the light of the cross, and you come back to the sign of Osiris risen. So that is the Liber O version of the lesser ritual, the hexagram. And one of the points I want to make about this is that if you take a look at, I included that article about the Goetic Circle, and I just want to mention this in the context of this operant field idea, right? So we're banishing pentagram, we're invoking hexagram to get our microcosm and macrocosm to interlock and function correctly. And basically, you've got a field now where your magic works better. Okay? Well, if you take a look at the circle from the Goetia, which is from the 1600s, so it's an old grimoire, take a look and what you'll see. You'll see pentagrams around the outside, and you'll see hexagrams on the inside of the circle. So that's kind of like how the operant field works. We're invoking hexagrams, we're banishing pentagrams. And Crowley also talks about, in the Book of Lies, this idea of the holy hexagram being based on the inversion of nature. And however, maybe a little dark, fluffy that sounds, the inversion of nature, in a sense, is really being embodied here. So normally, when we're just walking around, going about our day, our microcosmic sphere of sensation is here, and the exterior world is out here. Okay? But what are we doing with the operant field in magic? Well, we're taking our sphere of sensation, and we're going to clear that out to make some space, and then we're going to pull the forces of the exterior world into that space. And the two are going to interlock and create the field. Okay? So, in a sense, it really is a quote-unquote inversion of nature, or at least it's an inversion of our consciousness. It's exteriorizing that which is within, and it is calling in that which is without. And in that situation, you then have a space which is a solid foundation for you to stand on to direct the forces of nature, like it talks about Liber Libre, and to really do effective magic. I found that when I switched from banishing pentagram, banishing hexagram to banishing pentagram, invoking hexagram, my magic got better almost right away. And a few other people have talked about that too. The one other thing that you want to make sure that you do when you're constructing your rituals is don't banish with the hexagram after your ritual. Okay? What you're doing with your ritual is you are creating something. This is a thing that you're going to send out and you're going to do something. You're maybe doing it by yourself or you're doing it with the help of a spirit or whatever. Okay? Well, you've sent this out into the macrocosmic universe and you don't want to banish it, right? So what you want to do instead of doing a microcosmic and macrocosmic banishing at the end of your ritual, which I found really kind of tamps down much of the effect your ritual can have, unless things are anchored by talismans and there's some other caveats that you can do. It works a lot better, in my experience, to just close with the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram. So what you're doing there is you're invoking up to what you're doing all this stuff, you're doing this macrocosmic field using the lesser hexagram, but then when you close your ritual, you're just doing the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, just kind of detach from this thing that you're sending out into the universe. In a way, it's a structure a little bit more like how chaos magic works, where you maybe open with like a vortex, and then you'll do a sigil, and then you banish by laughter, which is basically just separating yourself from the sigil that you sent out. And I'm doing a similar thing, but I'm using these thelemic ceremonial forms. And Golden Dawn inspired ceremonial forms, but they are the thelemic versions, and they are different. And like I mentioned in the lesser pentagram ritual, everything about the Golden Dawn version and the thelemic version, they don't necessarily line up 100%. Crowley did make some changes to these rituals. So in the context of your daily practice, then, this is what you should do. So once you learn the lesser ritual, the hexagram, you should go to a daily practice that is the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, the lesser invoking ritual, the hexagram, turning on the macrocosm, and then the middle pillar. And then, if you're going to meditate, you can meditate for a period of time, and then just close with the Kabbalistic cross. That is largely, the practice that I do. I've got a lot of idiosyncrasies in mind. The basic structure of that, though, that is a practice when I'll do there's star ruby, star sapphire, and 11-fold seal, or I'll do lesser pentagram, lesser banishing pentagram, lesser invoking hexagram in a version that you see me doing the elixir rites, and then the 11-fold seal. But the structure is basically the same. And I have done that type of practice for decades now. And it is very useful to do on a daily basis. It can be done relatively quickly. And it is something that is pretty easy to stick to. You can do it in the morning. You can do it when you go to bed at night. You can do it both times, but let me advise you not to burn yourself out doing this stuff. I had a question on one of the YouTube videos from someone who feels like, they have to do the rituals, really slow and carefully visualize everything. Well, that's true to an extent, okay? But what I would actually recommend is focus on, learning the mechanics of the ritual, then adding the visualizations, and then really working to speed it up so that you could do like the quarter as a coordinated motion. If you see me do these rituals, I cast them very fast. You don't need to cast them as fast as me. Everybody kind of has their own speed, and it's based on breath work and timing. And I have asthma, so my lung capacity is not as high as what some other people's are, and so my breathing is a little faster. So based on that, I wind up doing the rituals kind of quick. But, at the same time, if you're doing, a lesser pentagram, and if you're doing a lesser pentagram, lesser hexagram, middle pillar, and you're spending, a half hour or something on that, that's what's going to happen is you're going to get burned out. And you need to be careful when doing these practices that that kind of thing doesn't creep in there. And it'll creep in there if you wind up spending too much time doing it. Like I said in my pentagram ritual, the Golden Dawn, you have to say, the minimal amount of effort required for the practice. And Crowley's like, that's terrible. It's like, you shouldn't be doing the minimum amount of effort. You should be giving your all to this and focusing on it completely. And, well, if you're Aleister Crowley, you're independently wealthy. You could spend hours a day doing magical practices. You could travel wherever you want in the world. Your situation is a lot different than somebody who, like myself. I'm, reasonably well off. But, at the same time, I still, I work a job, pretty good job, as an IT consultant, but I still have to devote the time to that job, just like anyone else would to, whatever they do for a living. And so my time is limited. And one of the things that I wanted to work on with developing this sort of practice, and what I think I've come to a pretty good place with, is coming up with a relatively condensed, straightforward practice that seems to work for a lot of people. It can be done reasonably quickly. You should get to the point where you can do it in like, under 10 minutes or so. Okay. Aside from the meditation piece, you do kind of just have to spend the time. And so, meditation, you're looking at 20 minutes of meditation. That some of your total practice is like a half hour a day. And remember, because you've got the invoking piece in from the lesser ritual, the hexagram, and you have the banishing piece from the lesser ritual, the pentagram, you don't need to do 2 sessions a day. You can break it down to 1 session a day, in the morning or at night, depending on what works for you. I do mine at night. I am not a morning person. I'm not good at doing anything in the morning. And I find that, with magical discipline, I can force myself to do it. But again, I kind of don't see the point in that. It's good to have the capacity to do it, but there isn't really a lot of value at pushing yourself, against your nature for a long period of time. Thelema is about individual will. Individual will is about your individual nature. And so you should strive to have your life conform to the fundamental nature that you have. And so with that, I'm going to wrap up here on the lesser ritual, the hexagram. I'm going to move on to some of the other forms later on. Somebody had asked about Enochian in the comments. At some point, I am going to go ahead and do videos on the Heptarchia Mystica, Great Table, and the 30 Airs. But that's a little ways down the road with the way that I do this stuff, with the way I do my Enochian templates. I do actually use these rituals, lesser pentagram, lesser hexagram, even, middle pillar. And then I have some corresponding ones that are written completely in Enochian that are in my books that I also use sometimes. But it's good to know the basic structure because they were heavily based on the lesser pentagram, lesser hexagram, and middle pillar concept when I was putting those rituals together. So with that, here's wishing you a great rest of the evening. And thank you very much for watching. Love is the law. Love and your will.